is and ever shall be. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, timeless Christianity 24 hours a day.
This is Everyday Orthodox with your host Elisa Bieletich on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-RADIO. Now, here's Elisa.
It is Sunday, March 5th, 2023, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bieletich Davis, and this is Everyday Orthodox. So we are live tonight. We're streaming on the app. We are streaming on the website. We are streaming on YouTube. You can find us all over the place right now. If you ever struggle to listen to live shows on your app, when you open up the app, if there's a red button flashing on the top, that means, hey, there's a live show right now, and you click on that, and it'll take you there. When nobody's live, it's not necessarily flashing, but when there's a live show, it'll be flashing for you. But at any rate, welcome to Everyday Orthodox. We get together here every Sunday night to meet another Orthodox Christian and to build community through conversation. We are divided into so many jurisdictions. We are worshiping in different languages, sometimes on different calendars with different traditions, but we're all Orthodox. And it's just beautiful, I think, for us to get to know one another. I've found personally, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I have actually met neighbors and realized that they were Orthodox too, but it's like, oh, you're Antiochian or you're OCA or something. And I've never met them because they go to a different parish right in my same town. And there just aren't that many of us, so we should all get to know each other. So I think that's a real benefit. I think really that true Orthodox unity is not really about administration. It's really about what happens when we all come together as beloved brothers and sisters in Christ. And the more that we do that, the more we're fulfilling Christ's desire for us to be united. So here we are. So welcome. Now, we are live, as I said. We have Matushka Trudy Richter in the studios in Indiana. She's right there engineering the program, and she's ready to receive your calls. If you'd like to call in, you can do so at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. And you're welcome to call anytime to join the conversation. But tonight we have a wonderful guest. Our guest is actually Coptic Orthodox, which I'm always delighted when we get to know a few more of our Coptic brothers and sisters, because that's another dividing line that just doesn't seem to get crossed often enough. And I'm just so delighted by that. So I'm thrilled to introduce him to you tonight. His name is Meseker Yohannes. He was born in California and baptized into the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. And so Tewahedo. I say it wrong. It's hard for me. Tewahedo Church. And after he actually grew up, though, not in California, but in Nevada, he became a software engineer at a solar software startup, and he moved to Texas like I did. So I'm going to get to hear all about that story, and I'm glad that you're joining us tonight so that you can as well. So without any further ado, welcome to the program.
How are you?
I'm good. It's so good to have you on the show. Let's see, I guess I don't want to jump ahead, so we have to start at the beginning. So tell me, you said that you were born in California. Where in California, and what was your family like?
I was born in San Diego, California, in Southern California.
Beautiful.
Both of my parents.
That's a nice place. San Diego is one of my favorite places.
Yeah, beautiful. I asked my mom actually not too long ago why my parents decided to move there, and she said, I think I saw a commercial saying how beautiful San Diego was, and I just decided to move. And her and my dad were dating at the time, so they had kind of agreed that they would move to San Diego together.
Oh, wow. That's nice. Yeah. Oh, that's very nice. So are your parents of Ethiopian descent? Is that how you ended up in the Ethiopian church?
Yes, yes. So my parents are both immigrants from Ethiopia. They met in the United States. My mom actually came to California by way of New Mexico.
Oh,
And she was actually in San Jose in the Bay Area for a number of years when she met my dad. And when they decided to get married, he was actually living in Orange County at the time, and they both kind of, I guess, compromised on San Diego, and that's where I was born,
that's a
along
good
with my two
call.
younger brothers.
Oh,
Yeah,
neat.
it is a good
Yeah,
call.
I mean, I would say if I were in San Jose or in Orange County, absolutely, I'd move to San Diego. Absolutely, right? San Diego is like the best
Right.
part of California. I love that. Okay, so you guys were born there. Did you live in San Diego very long? And actually, two questions. One, you
Yeah.
said you and your two brothers. Are you the oldest of
hmm
three?
I'm the oldest of three. Yeah, we're all a year apart actually, so we're pretty
Oh,
close in age.
wow. Right
Yeah.
on, one right after the other. Oh, that's a lot of work.
hmm hmm
Did you
Yeah, my
guys
mom
stay?
was tough.
I bet that's a lot. Three boys, one every year.
Three boys. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. I have a lot of respect for your mom. She's been through a lot. But
Yeah. Yeah. She's a strong woman.
so did you guys
It,
stay
it,
in San Diego or what did you do?
we lived in San Diego for 4 years, and then my dad's job moved to Vegas. He was an accountant at the time, and so I think my parents talked about it, and because
Happened at that time. That's probably right around when I was moving my kids to Texas. It got
Mhm.
really expensive in California and it's hard.
Yeah,
It's so beautiful and it's so lovely and the weather's good, but it gets really expensive. And if you want to have three kids in one
mhm.
year or three
Yeah.
kids in 3 years, that's definitely a call for moving. So, what was it
Mhm.
like growing up in Las Vegas? I mean, I'm sure for a lot of people, when they hear that you grew up in Las Vegas, they're just picturing like the strip with all the casinos on it, right? And
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Las Vegas is really much bigger than that, right? Like there's a university, there's all kinds of stuff. What is it like growing up in Las Vegas?
You know, Vegas is actually a pretty. It feels like a pretty ordinary place when you spend some time there. I kind of tell people that it's kind of like Phoenix, but with the strip, and like random, like there's like these random Vegas quirks that you kind of get used to. So, for example, um, if you go to a gas station or a grocery store, it's not uncommon to have like a room where there's just like slot machines everywhere, and
Right.
you don't really pay attention to it as a kid because it just got part of the background. Like you hear like the sounds of slot machines everywhere, but you don't really pay attention to it. The houses, the neighborhoods, they look a lot like houses and neighborhoods in Arizona. There's a lot of churches too. Actually, at one point, I think there was a stat that I heard where I think there was like the most churches per capita of all, like of any big city or something like that in Las Vegas.
Isn't
So
that
it's
funny? That's the opposite of what people
yeah,
would think, right? It's like, oh, city,
yeah, yeah.
city. And it's like, well, the people who live there, not really, right? The people who live there are just normal
hmm
people going to church and maybe
Yeah.
playing the slot machine at the gas station sometimes. Like,
Yeah,
just less
yeah.
that
A lot of
big
Mormons
deal.
too.
Oh,
A
really?
lot of
A lot of
Mormons too.
Mormons.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think the
okay.
city was settled by Mormons, and eventually there's like these interesting layers. So it was settled by Mormons, but I think at some point the mob came and had like built a ton of casinos, and then there was like this like boom where you have like service industry workers kind of moving in the 80s and 90s.
Mhm.
So it made for a really kind of weird environment when I reflect on it. But growing up, it was just very boring actually and ordinary.
That's funny. But yeah, it's hard
Yeah.
to imagine, right? Like, okay, well, what happens when you take a bunch of Mormons and then you add some
Had the
mobsters?
mob.
It's
Yeah.
like, and then you get the whole colorful like crew of people who show up afterwards.
Mhm.
That's kind of amazing, actually. But
Yeah, yeah.
that's neat, though. What is the weather like there, though? What was it like? How hot does it get in the summer in Las Vegas, Nevada?
It gets pretty hot. It gets over 110 pretty regularly. I want to say the heat starts in April, like it starts to heat up, and it doesn't cool down until maybe beginning of October, end of September. So
Oh
growing up, it
man.
was like you were like on summer vacation, but there's like heat warnings, and my mom was kind of she always wanted to err on the safe side, so we weren't allowed to play out. We weren't allowed to play outside as much as we'd liked during the summer. I think
Wow.
that was what made me feel the sort of like kind of the ennui, like the just kind of feeling bored. A lot of the time as a kid, I think it came from like those breaks where it was just too hot to go outside, so we just had to stay inside and watch TV or use our
Wow.
imagination.
Wow, because living in Texas, I feel like, sorry for myself because it's so hot in the summertime, but I don't think I've ever experienced a heat. You know what? Probably better not to go outside today. Like, that's hot. That's very, very hot.
Yeah,
Did your
yeah,
parents
yeah,
have
yeah.
any kind of advantage coming from Ethiopia? Like, is Ethiopia super hot as well? So were they normal with it? Or was it like, no, this was overwhelming no matter where you're from?
Ethiopia is actually very. I guess the temperature is very moderate. Maybe I don't know if it's Mediterranean, but it's
That-
the based on its latitude. I mean, it's near the equator, so at lower elevations it's very hot. But most of the country is at a higher elevation.
Oh,
There's a I think the Great Rift cuts through there, so majority of the country is like I don't know above maybe 2 or 3 thousand feet. So where my parents grew up in the capital city, it fluctuates. It averages out between 60 and 70 something degrees for the most part.
oh,
So
wow. That's
for
nice.
them, it was a big change. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, it would be more like desert, like just more like Las Vegas. It's not at all. Oh, no. So your parents
Yeah,
were just like melting. Oh, dear.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Vegas,
no.
it's a very desert climate, and where we came from, it was high elevation. The temperature was more moderate, very green, reddish brown soil. It just felt like when I would go to visit, I just felt like there was life everywhere. You know, like wherever you looked, like there was no barrenness. You know what I mean? And
Oh, wow.
where I grew up in Vegas, it was very different. But
Yeah.
but on the other, incorporated in like the early 1900s. So just the streets, the buildings, like everything it felt very new. So there was a sense of cleanliness. You know what I mean? That I think I
Yep.
appreciate now.
Absolutely. So how often did you get a chance to go to Ethiopia as a kid?
As a kid, two times. The first time was when I was 12, and the second time was when I was 15, and then once as an adult when I was 20, right after I turned 20, which is about 11 years ago. 11.
Have any extended family that also moved, or is everybody back in Ethiopia?
On my mom's side, the majority of her family is still back in Ethiopia, but when she came here, her brother was living in the US. He came in high school. And after she moved, she was one of nine, and about half of her siblings moved here, and the other half stayed in Ethiopia. Or some of them actually came to America and they kind of tried it out for a few years and they didn't really like it, so they moved back. So about half of her siblings, maybe a little less than half, now live in the U.S., and the other half and a lot of her extended family live in Ethiopia. Whereas my dad's family, most of them have already moved to the States. Like even to the extent, I think one thing that kind of
Were you able to see them very often, or were any of them anywhere close to Nevada, or how close was your
a,
family
a,
then?
a lot of them were in LA, in the Bay Area. So those relatives we got to see at least once a year, maybe more.
What do you suppose? Why Washington, D.C.?
My guess is that I have two suspicions. One is that the
Side. Did
Mhm,
you
mhm.
did you get to play like sports? Do they do indoor sports, or what do they like? Do the kids do you have soccer teams and stuff like that?
They do, yeah. They have soccer, basketball. They have indoor and outdoor sports. I think growing up, the indoor sports you kind of had to pay for, like whether it's like membership
Hmm.
to to use facilities, or
Somebody's got to
things
pay
along
the
those
air
lines.
conditioning bill, which is surely very
Some
high for those
exactly,
gyms.
exactly. So we would go to YMCA and we did organized sports every once in a while. In high school though, I ran. That was very much not an indoor sport, unfortunately. So we felt the full wrath of the
Oh,
Vegas heat over the
wow.
summers, in the fall and in the spring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
what kind of a kid were you? What else did you like to do? You like to like run track in the extreme heat. And what
You know,
else?
I think I like to challenge myself. Like I was always
Yeah.
very curious. I read a lot. I was very much a nerd. Um, my mom, she had put this huge emphasis on education, and so a lot of our time was spent like studying or reviewing, reading. We had to read X number of minutes every day, um, and I think through that I had developed like I guess a desire to be excellent, and to see how far I could go. And I think with running, with long distance running, it kind of it was sort of kind of like that. Like it was this sport where it was inherently like painful. Like it wasn't as fun as like basketball or football or something like that. But you could challenge yourself and you could spend a lot of time on your own developing yourself. And in addition to that, I think as being an Ethiopian American, there's a lot of, like long distance running is sort of like the sport that Ethiopians are known for. So for me, it was a way to connect with my country, with my home country, with my parents' country. So when I saw myself excelling at long distance running, I was challenging myself, but I also felt like I was sort of like following in this tradition that was handed down to me. And so, yeah, I was.
I love the connection to Ethiopia in that way as well, right? That idea that like you're in this long line of great runners and that you're a part of that. It's beautiful.
And so we had a lot of fun. We would go out and play sports together, like on in our cul-de-sac. And yeah, we would also argue and fight and do all the stuff that brothers do.
Oh, that's
We
lovely.
yeah.
That's great. So, okay, so as you're growing up there in Las Vegas, did you have an Ethiopian church there in town? Were you able to be in connection with your culture there as well and through that?
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah, so the Ethiopian community in Vegas at the time, in the 90s and early 2000s when I was growing up, it was very nascent. So we actually, when we moved to Ethiopia, when we moved to Vegas, we actually started going to an OCA church because it was the only Orthodox church we could find. So there was a small Ethiopian community that would sometimes gather to pray, and especially for feast days. But our regular Sunday church was for maybe 4 or 5 years. And when the Ethiopian Orthodox Church community in Vegas got organized, they had sort of they actually bought a home and they remodeled the home to have they kind of renovated the living room to become the sanctuary. And
Wow.
the priests they lived on the top floor. And so when that was organized, maybe when I was like in 7th grade, we started to go to that church regularly.
Oh, that's great. I love a church like that, like when you're just starting out kind of as a mission and it just, I don't know, was this your experience? In my experience, being in mission churches, it means that you have to do all the work yourselves, right? That you can't sit back and assume someone else is going to chant and decorate the church and clean up after Pascha or whatever. You really, like your family has to show up and do it. Did you guys have that experience? Were you kind of one of the founding families? So you guys were all whatever altar boys and cleaning up.
We kind of we pour cups of holy water and we distribute it to the people, and that's usually something that the young boys would do. So we served as deacons. In the Ethiopian church, the diaconate start as young as 7, and you kind of operate or function sort of like an altar boy at the beginning, and over time, as you learn the various chants, you start to kind of accumulate more responsibilities. So we were, fortunate enough to serve as deacons, clean up the church and everything that you mentioned. Like it was very much a church startup, church plant. There wasn't AC in the summertime, so we had to figure out how to get people fans. We had to
there wasn't
do
AC
everything
in summertime in Las Vegas. Oh,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
seems
yeah.
dangerous. Like that sounds terrible. Although I guess most services are in the morning, right? So at least it's not at the height of the heat. But
It's true. It's true.
but yeah, I mean that becomes a very important job. Being the one who passes out water and fans is like the most critical. Like you're second only to
Oh
the
yeah.
priest at liturgy. That is a big deal. Now, as a
No, it's
kid,
very true.
you went back and forth between, so you were in the Ethiopian church and then you were in the OCA and then back to the Ethiopian church. Did that, like as a kid, did you register all the differences between those? Or was it just kind of like, oh, different churches are different? Like, did you notice a lot of differences when you were in the OCA?
I mean, to me, the biggest difference was just language in my mind. I mean, obviously the Byzantine rite is very different from the Alexandrian rite that we chanted in the Ethiopian church. But because I didn't pick up on those nuances, I just figured there was the English-speaking church and then the Amharic-speaking church. And
Yeah.
when we were growing up in San Diego, I don't have a lot of memories of church back then. So my memory really just does start with the OCA and with the Ethiopian church we used to go to in Vegas. And what that was more prominent was because the OCA church because the service was in English, my mom expected us to participate more. So we had to sort of participate in the liturgy, and we had to stand, and we couldn't sit, and it was more painful. And
You guys can understand this, so you have to behave like adults in here with the rest of us.
yeah,
And then when you
yeah,
don't understand,
yeah.
it's like, all right, you can relax. But so did you guys understand? Is Amharic in the church, is that the same
Mhm.
as the language spoken on the streets, or is it different? You know what I
So
mean? Like Slavic churches
yeah.
are all different, and Greek churches,
Mhm,
it's more
mhm.
ancient form. Is it like that with Ethiopian churches as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in Ethiopia, there's a similar, uh, I guess, duality where like there is an older liturgical language called Ge'ez, or some scholars call it classical Ethiopic, but Ge'ez is like the sort of like old language that's no longer spoken. And then there's the vernacular. Uh, at the church that we were attending was Amharic, so the service was usually in both languages. So the parts that were chanted were usually in Ge'ez, and the parts that were spoken or read were usually in Amharic. And the Ge'ez is like analogous to like Latin in the Roman Catholic Church, or Slavonic in the Slavic would have either Ge'ez being chanted or Amharic being spoken or taught.
That's interesting. That the dividing level, any language from your parents, or was it a different one, or how did that work out?
Yeah, great question. Oh, so I grew up speaking Amharic when I was very young. I was my first, and so when I got back, I was able to speak sort of like with like maybe I have like a casual, functional sort of working understanding of the language. So now let's say, so there are some words that are word for word the same, and there are some words that are not, and it takes a bit of like, I don't know, maybe context clues, like depending on like sometimes there might be like a little excerpt from like Our Father, and so depending on like if you can recognize a few of the words, you can infer the meaning of the other words, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Totally makes sense. But so maybe your mom didn't have to go that easy on you in church, because you were actually picking up a lot of it. But it works out like Old English in church that would also like sound off to us. I don't know, because it's an older form of the language. But all right, well, we need to take a short break here, but we will be right back. And so just remind our listeners, or you're welcome to call in at 1-855-AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. And we'll be back with Meseker Yohannes. We'll find out what he ended up doing, where he went after Las Vegas. We'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio.
Ancient Faith Publishing is pleased to announce The Story of Jesus, A History and Theology of Christ, from before his conception in Mary's womb until his ascension. Revered 20th century Egyptian elder and scholar Matthew the Poor wrote many volumes on the subject of Christ's significance, life, and teachings, which translator James Helmy has distilled into one highly readable book that will make a valuable addition to every Christian's library. The Story of Jesus is now available in paperback and ebook at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Meseker Yohannes. And we've been talking about growing up Ethiopia. You were a teenager. Was the mission parish you guys had worked in so much, was it like a pretty big parish? Did you kind of have a youth group and other Ethiopian teens that you could run around with? Or was it fairly small group?
It was a small group. It was sort of I don't know, maybe sort of like it's like an hourglass shape. There was a lot of brothers. I want to say it was like maybe 10 kids total that were our age, and then there was a lot of younger kids. So that the generation that followed us, they sort of had a more kind of like, they had a proper youth program, Sunday school. So whereas we had to kind of figure things out on our own to some extent. We had priests when a priest was available, but our group was pretty small, and we kind of all, I think, chose different paths after we became adults as well.
What do you mean? Like different paths, like going different places, or maybe even religiously different paths?
Religiously different paths. I want to say the majority, I think, of that group really had sort of like deep religious questions that that I guess they took time to answer. So some became atheists, like some, I guess, pursued other Christian traditions, and so actually got married with my wife at the same home church. And today it's sometimes I get Jane when there were processions on feast days or the Feast of the Cross. In the Ethiopian tradition, you have a huge bonfire, and the neighbors, they eventually had to close that church, and they opened a new church in a storefront. So we used to go to church like when I was towards the end of high school, literally like in a strip mall. And then one of the units was like, where we had to do church. And since then, God has been so good. Now there is an actual church building that is in an area where that is zoned for churches, and it's a big, beautiful church. And I was able to get married there with my wife a few months ago. And the youth are more engaged, and it's a blessing just to see the growth that's taken place in the past. I want to say 12 to 15 years since I was
That's wonderful.
a young boy.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that it's the same in the Coptic tradition as well, but I know in the Eastern Orthodox, we always pray for the founders and benefactors of this holy church
Mm.
at every
Mhm,
liturgy, right? So you're
mhm.
one of the founders. You're like, even if you were a kid, you're one of the founders.
Yes,
So the
yeah.
benefit is like, you don't get the benefit of the pretty building and the air conditioning and the
Mhm,
youth group,
mhm.
but you do get like these constant prayers from the parish every week. So
Amen,
that's a
amen,
blessing.
amen.
That's something. I think it's interesting though, the idea that, maybe if there had been a more robust youth program, that
Mhm,
some more of the kids would have stuck around. And I don't know that that's always true, but
mhm,
I would imagine that, like you mentioned, that they had sort of deeper questions about the faith. And it's
mhm,
true that,
mhm,
we need to be giving our kids a place where they can ask those questions and where
mhm,
they can
mhm,
explore doubts and wrestle through things without us shutting them down or without like, no, no,
mhm,
no, this
mhm,
is the right answer, be quiet, right? And I
mhm,
think more and more youth groups are becoming places where kids can do that. And that's
mhm,
really a
mhm,
blessing. But it's true. It's such a shame to see, families bringing their kids to church every week and doing, but
mhm,
somehow it doesn't ever catch or take or
mhm,
however that
mhm.
is. But so when you
And-
finished high school, where did you
mhm.
go? What did you see yourself doing next? What did you think was going to happen, and what did happen?
So I wanted to be an engineer. Actually, initially I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I wanted to kind of build things with my hands and, maybe start a business one day. Um, and so I went to school to do that. I went to school to learn or to study mechanical engineering. And I was also a deacon at the time. So I wanted to, um, I, I was very much discerning the priesthood,
Oh,
and
wow.
so that was my vision for the future was, I would get to be this sort of like maybe this Elon Musk engineer or something, or like, a priest. And
Very beautiful. They're very good. So what was the first step? What did you do?
so I went to college my freshman year, started taking classes, but I also didn't necessarily live very close to an Orthodox church. I had to get rides, so I wasn't able to go to Sunday service the way I normally was able to as a kid. Um, and
I
and anyway,
Where were you? You were not at UNLV, right? You
oh
changed.
no,
Where'd you go?
so I wanted to leave Vegas, so I actually went to Stanford in the Bay Area, California.
Oh, wow.
Um,
Stanford. I love how you just throw that in there. You should have been like that from the start. Like, I went to Stanford. That's impressive. I went to Berkeley,
Yeah.
of course, so I'm not that impressed.
Oh, okay.
It is.
I know. I know how it is. I know how it
It's
is.
a great school. That's awesome. So when you say that as a kid, like your mom was pushing you academically and
Mhm.
you sort of became fascinated with this idea of excellence and trying to see how far
Mhm.
you could go, you really did a great job. You were awesome as a high
Praise
schooler,
God. Praise
right? You
God.
got to be. Oh, that's great. Okay, so you went to Stanford, and I assume you were in the College of Engineering?
Yes, yes. I don't know if it's like this in Berkeley, but in Stanford, like you can moving around is pretty easy. So you can
Oh,
start as
that's
an
right.
engineer, but you can switch your major, and it's not.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
not
it's.
like that at Berkeley. She did not get
Mhm,
in like
mhm,
me, but they said that you could take classes anywhere. Like as an undergrad, you
mhm,
could take
mhm.
a law
Yeah,
class if
yeah.
you wanted. You could take a medicine class. I think
Mhm,
that's really neat. I think that's actually very unique among
mhm.
universities. That's really cool. So
Yeah.
they would kind of let you explore whatever you needed to explore, huh?
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. And also for what it's worth, I didn't get into Berkeley, so Stanford was
Ah,
kind of like,
see.
I had to go. You know what I mean?
That's just because Berkeley was like, no, where are you actually coming? We know you're going to Stanford, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's funny. That's cool. But no,
But
so you get there and you're thinking engineering, but you had some freedom to explore a little bit.
yeah, yeah. So they also had like really good humanities classes that you're sort of required to take a certain number of humanities classes, and I got exposed to them. Um, I had actually before declaring, I was considering other engineering disciplines, and I had kind of fell like I kind of got interested in electrical engineering, and while I was uh, pursuing electrical engineering, there was a class that I was taking that was very difficult. It was like I think the hardest class in the core called intro to I think digital circuits or digital logic. And I had a friend who had already graduated. His name is Femi. I think you might know
I
him.
do know Femi, absolutely.
And so I was actually asking him for help studying for this class. I just wanted some pointers, and he had already graduated, but he was in the area, and so we met up a few days later. And before we met up, he asked me like, tell me, if you could just send me the class that you've already taken. And I was a junior at this point, so I sent him all the class I took in the past couple of years. And when we met, he said, actually, I don't want to. Before we get into like studying for this class, I just want to like make a case that you study computer science instead. And he kind of at the time it was this was during the recession, and he had kind of seen that the market was only hiring software engineers. So he helped me build a 2-year plan to graduate on time as a computer science major. And I was taking my first class at the time, actually, my first
Oh,
computer
wow.
science class at that time. And
That's
yeah, I mean,
impressive. That's pretty hard to do, right? Without adding in
yeah,
a couple
yeah,
semesters, it's hard to change gears there. Oh, that's great. So you did
yeah,
change.
yeah,
You
I
liked
did. Mhm.
computer science as much as you enjoyed mechanical engineering?
I think I like the idea of mechanical engineering more, the idea of making things with my hands, but I found the actual work I was doing in my computer science classes more fulfilling, more satisfying. I think I got better feedback from my TAs and professors too. So it felt really good to be affirmed by TAs in classes that are like really big, where you know it's hard to get anyone's attention.
Yeah, it's hard
So
to stand out in a place like Stanford anyway, right? Because it's like,
right,
well,
yeah,
everybody here is pretty smart. So like, how do you get
yeah,
someone's attention? Well, and I think too that I think Femi's probably right. Don't you think that like career
oh yeah,
wise, I mean, we're going to need software forever. Mechanical engineering and civil engineering and stuff like that. We're going to need them, but
hmm
they're not in the same kind of demand as
hmm
software.
hmm
That's really true.
yeah,
Okay,
and
so
it was even more true back then. And like you mentioned, like this was it was the right call, and it's something that's kind of had this huge impact on my life, kind of changing gears and going in that direction. And there's actually a theme like mechanical engineering. I actually landed in software. The other